Hello and welcome everyone to the first part of the tutorial series I promised to make about real-time masking in Minimator. Today the topic will be volumetric light, and I'm gonna show you how you can make this volumetric light. The method I'll show you today supports multicolor, real-time shadows, and is sensitive to the sun or some other light source, depending on what light sources you have in your scene, so you can make it somewhat sensitive to that. So here we are in a brand new project, and the first thing that we want to do is of course import our scenery. So I'm just gonna use this little thing here again. As you can see, there are no windows in here yet. That's because I highly recommend you to import them individually or make them individually, because the point from which the volumetric light starts should be as two-dimensional as possible. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a surface, and as its texture select the Minecraft original glass texture I have here. Which looks like this, and here we basically have our glass now. Of course we want to place it just in the middle of our window, and then we of course want it to fit the size of our window, so we have to get 3 high and yes, 2 on the axis. Well, as you can see, yeah, that's not how we expect a window to look like. So we go into our library and then just change the horizontal and vertical repeat until, yes, the texture now fits the blocks. And yeah, we can basically do that again for the other window, but with another texture. And here we go. Setup done. Now we of course want to parent these to our scenery, and I'm actually gonna call this scene. And when we are done with our basic setup, we can start preparing the mask. What we want to do is duplicate this scene, move it somewhere where we cannot see it, and then we can start making the mask. You actually don't have to duplicate the entire scene. If you have like a big scenery, you don't want to do that because that's just way too heavy for Minimator. It is enough to reconstruct the glass with this middle blocks here. Well, actually, what we want to do is we want to correct this alpha issue here with Minimator, and just in case I'm also going to do that on the other side here. Then of course we want to name our things properly. The next thing we want to do is we want to spawn in a camera and parent it to our second scene. We actually want to name this something like mask scene. So what we want to do then is we want to position our camera right in the center of our windows, right in the center of our volume then, or in the center of what is gonna be our volume later, but just at the start point. So these two surfaces will be the beginning for the volume itself, and that's why the window or whatever should be as two-dimensional as possible, because otherwise we would not have a clear start for the volumetric light, and this could cause some shadows to not appear in the way that you want to, or that you would expect them to appear. Then we probably want to name this camera something like mask cam or something, and then we enable rotate around a point and make sure that the camera is viewing through the windows from outside. So this in our case is minus 90 degrees here, and then we should go into the camera and set the field of view to 1, and then we want to go out until we can see our whole window, which in our case is something like this. We actually want to change the resolution of our camera to an aspect ratio that fits our window, which in our case is 5:3. So we could use something like 500:300, and then we can adjust this more precisely. So probably 2750. Yeah, it is in my case here. So this should work quite well. The reason why we are doing this is because we expect light to behave in a very orthographical way. 1 degree is not exactly orthographical, but it is as close as we can get to the way light works in Minimator. Although I have to say that even the sunlight does not work orthographical, so this might not even... So this could even be a little more precise than a 100% orthographical view. What we want to do next is go to our both windows and subtract any color, means just subtract white from it so that they get completely black. And then we will spawn in surfaces with no texture and also parent them to the mask scene. And now we want to place them right behind our windows and also scale them in the proper way, meaning Z3 and X2 in our case here. The reason why I leave so much space between the actual glass pane and the surface itself is because the camera is so far away that even a very big distance like this one could cause clipping between the glass pane and the surface, so leave a little more space there just to avoid clipping. Important here is that the color of this surface will also be the color of your volumetric light. So we can just duplicate this one and then move it to the side and give it some color, something like that. And I actually recommend using the add HSB because we will later mix it with black so that you can still do that. So if you want to give it a color, do it with mix add HSB. So what you can see here is that the purple window is a little transparent itself on these borders here. In case that you don't want that, you can just delete it and use the regular window, but that's to personal preference, so I'm just gonna leave it, and you'll see how this looks too. Then there's one last thing we want to do, and that's select our mask scene and mix it with black completely so that we have a completely black scene here and only can see our windows. And as you can see from here, this looks pretty much like a mask. Well, that's because it is. Don't forget to save here and then, because the next thing that we are going to do could cause Minimator to crash in some particular situations when you want to delete things, because it gets some recursion errors. I actually don't understand why, but I definitely recommend you to save here and then. Now we are basically done with the mask setup. Now we can spawn in another surface with the mask cam as a texture applied to it, and this is it. Well, it doesn't look properly because first of all, the custom rotation point on this surface has to be 0, and then of course we want to scale it properly again, which is Z3 and X5 in our case here, because we have 3 blocks up and 5 blocks towards this direction. Then we of course want to parent this surface to our scene. Just reset its position, and we want to place it just in the center where we also placed our camera, but this time as this scenery as its center. Rotate it so that it lines up properly, and just ignore the Z fading, that's not a problem. Because what we actually will do now is we can select the surface, go into its properties and name it something like volume or whatever, and then we will enable glow and only render glow. You can also disable cast shadows and SSAO. As you can see, this already works somewhat, but it doesn't have a volume yet. And what you can also see is the difference between the semi-transparent glass pane on the right side here. That's because this glass pane also is semi-transparent. So yeah, that's the difference. I'm just gonna leave it as it is for now. So basically what we want to do now is we want to duplicate our volume surface and parent it to itself. And if we actually render this now, you will see nothing has changed because the surface is up there. So we gotta reset the position, rotation and scale. And I actually recommend to disable only render glow so that you can line everything up properly. And what we should do is move it by 1. Move it by 1, not 8. Move it by 1 towards our direction so that we have two surfaces behind each other now. And if we actually enable only render glow, you will see that we now have a tiny bit of a volume here. Well, it basically is no volume, it's just two surfaces just in front of each other so that it appears like a volume. What you should do though, just to make sure that everything renders properly, is to set the render depth to +1. So the very first surface should have a render depth of 0 and the next of 1. And now we only have to repeat this process a few times and then we actually have a volume. I highly recommend to not just select one of the layers in between, duplicate them and then parent it to the last one again, because then Minimator could throw some recursion errors, and I already did this tutorial twice and it happened both times, so just don't do that. If we now actually render this, we will see a volume, or well, the fake volume, but it's some kind of volume. But as you can see, it does not look the way you expect it to look. So the first thing that I recommend to do is select all the surfaces except of the first one, and then go to the glow color and say something like 220, because what we will see now is that we actually got a little bit of a gradient here, because we actually also should make sure that invert glow color is selected, because now the glow gets a little darker after every single surface, and that's what causes this gradient to appear. Another thing that we could do to make the glow not that bright is go to the first surface and make the glow color way darker, so you can see this affects the overall glow very much. But there actually is another way, so don't go too low on this one. Just something like 32. What we also can do is go to our both surfaces here and make them a little darker so that the actual glow also will be a little darker. Something like 80% should do it. And if we now render again, you can see, well, this is a little too less. So we go here and make this a little brighter again. Something like this. And as you can see, our volumetric light works pretty well. What I also recommend you to do is to select your volume and enable low quality hiding, because then Minimator won't calculate shading for the surfaces, since they only use a camera texture. So this camera won't render any shading for the surfaces here. So, and that's basically it. You can mess with the glow radius a little. I recommend a very low one, because as lower the radius is, as sharper the volumetric light will be. So, something between 10 and 15 usually does it quite well, depending on how close you put the surfaces next to each other, because you don't actually have to move them by one. You could also use bigger or smaller distances to make the effect more accurate, but one usually does a quite good job. So what we should do now is go to our background and change a few of the settings. For example, the sun. As you can see, the sun is there, so this kind of doesn't make any sense. So we'll just align the sun properly, and what you can see now is that the effect got a little stronger. That's because now these surfaces also are in light and shade, so we definitely should tell everything in the mask scene to not cast shadow or SSAO, just to make that one sure. And now the effect only got stronger but is not disturbed anymore. That still is because the surfaces now are in light and therefore a little brighter. And I prefer to keep it that way, because if we now actually should go to our nighttime, you see that the color and the strength of our volumetric light changes with the day-night transition. And that's only possible as long as we allow the surfaces to interact with light. If we were to just turn the brightness to 100%, this would not be possible anymore. So I recommend keeping it that way. And that's basically it for the effect itself. But we are not 100% done yet, because what you can see is, first of all, that the effect is way too strong, so we should go to our volume and readjust that. Something like that. Works quite well. But what you can see is that the sun is higher than our camera, so that means actually these shadows should not be casted in a absolutely horizontal way. So how can we fix that? We select our mask camera here and try to line it up with our sun so that we get quite the same position there. Yes, and something like 10 degrees should work here. And what we gotta do now is go to our volume and actually disable only render glow so that we can see what is happening here. And disable low quality hiding so that we can see them. And now we should also rotate them by, in our case here, minus 10 degrees, so that everything still lines up with the information the surfaces get from the camera. And if we now actually render this again, you will see that the shadows are casted in a not 100% vertical way anymore. But we are still not 100% done yet, because what you can see is now where we rotated the surfaces that we get a little gap here on the upper part of the window where we actually don't see volumetric light, because there is no. And in exchange for that, we see that we have a little too much light here. But is there a way to fix that? Yes, it is. And here it gets a little dangerous, because here it could be that Minimator crashes here and then if you try to move things around. So be careful with that, save often. And what I usually do is duplicate the last surface and again parent it to the very first surface. Now you can close that. And what we want to do now is, first of all, disabling low quality hiding and only render glow, so that we can see what we're doing here. And then we'll basically do the same thing again, just in the other direction. So we go +1, and this time we actually will have to go down with the render depth. Now we should render this just to make sure that it works in the way we expect it to work. So basically what should happen if we disable that, it should get a little darker. Yes, it does. That's exactly what we need. If this does not work, you should try to restart Minimator, or maybe you copied or duplicated multiple surfaces at once, which could cause some serious issues with Minimator. I already done that, and Minimator crashed a few times, and so be careful with that. Now what you should do is make them visible again, go to your surface, duplicate it, and do the same game again, just in the other direction, until you filled this gap here, which in my case is now. Then, to make sure everything works as it should, disable them again, and you should try to disable. Yes, this works just the way it should. But now we still have the problem that we have too much light behind the surface here. Well, if you don't care about that and think that this is looking good, then you of course can leave it like this. If you want to fix this, then there is a less or more easy way to do that. You just have to spawn in a new surface with no texture, and of course parent it to the scene. You have to place it right into the glass panes, of course with the same size again, and at the exact same position, and it again does not matter if they Z-fight or not. And what we want to do then is make its alpha 1 and also tail it to glow. It should not cast shadow or SSAO, that's important. Because basically what we did now is we used the alpha glitch, but just for the glow. The thing is, this probably won't work yet because we did not adjust the render depth as we should. Basically it's our goal to now find the right render depth so that we can mask the light behind the glass panes away. This render depth is 1 lower than the lowest render depth of the other volume surfaces. So in my case that's -4, so I should go to -5. Then you of course should tell it to only render glow, and this problem should be fixed. Then you can just enable everything, and now what we should get is that we only have volumetric light in front of our glass panes and not behind it. I personally wouldn't always mask the back volume away, just because with it might even look a little better because the effect is a little stronger and it's not that currently you can see that we almost have no volume here and more volume there, which is kind of not what we expect it to be like, but that's the way it currently works. You can affect this with a gradient overlay over the windows here, but this is a little too complex and the tutorial already is long enough, and I actually have 2 more things to discuss with you, so I'm not going to explain how to do that now. One of the things I wanted to discuss with you are the glow options. Here you can do lots of tweaking. For example, I highly recommend using the glow fall off because without it, you don't necessarily have to use it. Now the volume basically has another style, but of course you should try to find something that fits the way you wanted it to look. So yeah, that's basically it about the volumetric light. There is one more thing I want to show you, and that's how you can place things in front of the window so that they actually cast a shadow. Let's just spawn in a Steve and parent him to the scene. That's important. You have to parent it to something so that you can copy the exact position relative to this windows. This sounds more complicated than it actually is. So if we actually place our Steve just in front of the window here, you will see that he casts shadows on the surface itself, but these shadows are not visible in the volume of the volumetric lighting. And you can see that Steve casts a shadow, but no volumetric shadow. So how do we do that? Well, it's quite easy. You just duplicate your Steve, parent him to the mask scene so that he is at the exact same position, and just make him completely black. And that's basically it. So now you should get a volumetric Steve shadow here. The cool thing about this is that as long as both Steves are doing the exact same thing, the volumetric shadow will move with the Steve, which is quite cool, and the way you expect shadows to work, which I think looks pretty damn awesome. This is the last thing I wanted to show you about the volumetric light I developed. The interesting thing is that this is possible since you can only render glow, which is, I think, since Minimator 1.2.2 or something. I don't know. But actually, that's it for today. Tomorrow's tutorial will be about how you can make perspectively correct portals with support for lighting, shadows, and everything else. I hope you could learn something, and my English was good enough to explain the things at least a little so that they make sense. If you have any questions, just ask me in the comments or in the Minimator forum. You will find me under YoGames Studios. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening till the end, and we'll see next time.